Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti from anthonymorganti.com. This is episode 6 of the video series where I'm going over all the plugins put out by Topaz Labs. In this episode, we're going to do black and white effects 2. Now, before I start, let me say that I have no affiliation with Topaz Labs. They're not paying me to do these videos. All right, today we're going to send this image over to Topaz Labs Black and White Effects 2, and I'm sending it from Lightroom. What I would suggest you do, whatever program you use to process your images, that you do most of the processing in that program first. In my case, in Lightroom, I did all my adjustments basically, except effects. I didn't add a vignette. I normally will add a vignette to my image. I did not do that. In the detail panel, I did add sharpening and noise reduction. If you use an external program for noise reduction, such as Topaz Denoise, then I would suggest you do that first. Send it to denoise, get rid of the noise. Then, when you're back in Lightroom, send that image to Black and White Effects 2. It's just good practice to, before you do any heavy processing, that you get rid of the noise first. All right, so we have this image. It's completely processed except for effects. I did lens corrections, everything. I'm going to send it over to Black and White Effects 2. I'm going to right-click on the image, go down to Edit In, and I'm going to go to Fusion Express 2. Remember, if you're using Lightroom, Topaz Labs plugins, most of them, do not work as a direct plugin in Lightroom. You have to download their free app, Fusion Express 2, and that acts as kind of a holder for all their plugins. Now, I already converted this to a TIFF, so I'm just going to edit the original. I did that to save time. If you're shooting RAW, you have to edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments. If you shoot JPEG, I would suggest you edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments. That way, if you mess up, you didn't ruin the original image. All right, we're going to do black and white effects too, so we just click Run. Now, when it opens, you'll see it's going to have some processing applied to the image already. That's because Topaz has sticky controls. I mentioned that in the previous videos on the different plugins. I don't care for the sticky controls that this effect. I just don't like it. What it is the whatever I did in Topaz in this app, whatever I did in it last session, gets applied in my new session. Some people like it, I guess. But anyways, I don't. So you can see it's right here, last used settings. Now we're just going to take a quick tour of the workspace. And those of you that are familiar with Topaz Labs stuff knows they're very similar from product to product. On the left-hand panel, we have our collections at the top and our presets at the bottom. It's my understanding that this program has 200 plus presets in it, and each preset or group of presets are kept in collections. Right now we're in the traditional collection, and if you go down below, as I hover over each of the presets, this flyout window comes out, and you could see the preset as it's applied to your image. So that's a pretty cool thing right there. You could get an idea of what that preset looks like. Saves a lot of time just hovering over those presets. If you would prefer to see the presets side by side and what they look like next to each other, go up to the collection and click on this little grid, and it will open a screen where it shows every preset that is in that collection, a little preview window in a grid view of it applied to the image. So you could see what, ones look totally terrible and those that look kind of decent, and kind of compare which one you may like to use over another. And if you like one, just click on it. So I happen to be using Quadtone 3. Now you'll see between the collections and the actual presets, there is a little area here and there's a star. What that is if you find that you're using a preset or a group of presets a lot, you could make it a favorite preset and then it will go in the favorites collection. So you could just find it that much easier. Plus, if you have maybe 10 different presets you use all the time, you don't really use anything else, put all 10 in your favorites. Then when you click on the grid view, you could see them all side by side. So I want to make Quadtone 3 a favorite. I'm just going to click on that little star. You can see that the star changed color over here. And when I go to the favorites folder, there is Quadtone 3 as one of my favorites. It also puts my last used settings. That was from my last session in there too. Obviously that will change every time. So that is how you create favorites. To the right of that little star is a plus. Once you adjust something, if you really like what you did, you could create your own preset by clicking that plus. Then next to that is a garbage can. You could throw out any preset that you created. If you find you're not using it anymore, just throw it out. You could import presets that other people created, or you could export presets that you created so you could share them with others. To the right of that is the little camera. That's to create a snapshot. You processed an image and you like it, but you want to try some other stuff to it and you don't want to lose what you did. Create a snapshot. You could create up to 99 snapshots. They're stored in this collection right here. And once you create a snapshot, then you can just keep processing. And if you decide you don't like what you did, go back to your snapshot um, collection and click on the applicable snapshot and you'll revert back to where you were. Now note that those snapshots are session specific. Once I close this app down, they're lost. So beware of that. Now along the top here we have these icons up here. To the left here we have a split view of before and after. Now you notice I sent in a color image. When I was in Lightroom, the image was in color. But my before is a black and white image. That's an option that is available in preferences that I'll show you in a second. A lot of people don't like to see a color before image. They want to see a gray tone image. So what I have it set up is to see the gray tone image as my before, and then my after is going to be the image processed. And as I mentioned, that is in preferences. So you go down here in the lower left-hand corner and click menu, go to preferences, and right here it says show colored before image. If I clicked that box, which I'm not gonna, the before image would be color. Now, if I did actually click that right now, it would still be black and white. I'd have to close Topaz Labs Black and White Effects down, then reopen it, and then it would be a color image. So if you prefer looking at a color image, remember that checkbox in Preferences. So this is the side-by-side view. If you click right here, this box, this is before, and then click it again, and that's after. You also could just hold your left mouse button in, that's before, let go, that's after. Hold the space key on the keyboard in, there's before, and there's after. Now you got some zoom modes. You go to zoom 1 to 1. You could click here and you zoom out to the fit view. You could zoom in degrees with these two magnifiers or zoom out. Now to the right of that we have some different kind of view modes. This first one with the Z, those of you that are familiar with the zone method of exposure, that was popularized by Ansel Adams and Fred Archer, if I remember right, is a way to develop and process images back in the day. And a lot of people still use it today and apply it to their digital images. And it actually is a very interesting way to process your image. It's the creation. There's exposure zones. Just real overview. There's exposure zones on your image, and they all have different luminance levels. And this is a way to get a balanced exposure and a balanced looking image that using these zones. Now, I'm not going to go into it real deep here. As a matter of fact, someday I may do a series of videos. It would take a series of videos to talk about this method, popularized, as I mentioned, most notably by Ansel Adams, but Fred Archer was involved in it too. Now, if you like processing your images using that method, you would click this Z, and you could see we get this kind of tone curve over here, and we have this color part of our image showing us our zones a little more readily. If you don't want to use it, just click on it and it goes away. Now, right here, it turns the navigation screen into a loop view, and then I could click anywhere on the image and it will show up in our loop, and we could turn that off by clicking it again. Next to that, we'll get rid of our panels, and if I click it once, it gets rid of the left panel. Click it a second time, it gets rid of the right panel. Click it again, it gets rid of both panels, and click it again, and they're back to where we started. So that's what that button does. Now this button will change the color of the surrounding area around the image to either black and white or shades of gray. So you could just click that to get it to where you like it. So that is pretty much the overview of the workspace outside of this right panel. The right panel is really where we're going to process our image. And as I mentioned, typically what I will do is I'll get a preset first, choose a preset that gets me close to something I like, and then I'll tweak it to get it to something I really like. Um, for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to reset the image so none of the presets are active anymore. And I'm going to show you what, to the best I can, show you what these controls do. Now, up top underneath the navigation window, there's these kind of, I think they call them like quick tools. And we have some filters. So if you want to apply a red filter to the image, you would click that. You know, as red filters will make the blue sky very dark and things like that. So you could apply these filters if you want to your image. And as soon as I applied a filter, you noticed that this slider opened up and you could actually change the hue of the filter and the strength of the filter. So you could experiment with that. Now I'm going to reset it again. And one thing I'll jump down here. Now you notice I have the parts open down here even though I reset it. If I want to close all this, this little arrow here looks like a corporal in the US Army. Click on that and it will close down all these tabs. All right, so that's going across the top here. We have these color filters. Directly below that we have some quick adjustments for contrast, brightness, and I can't remember. This is like basic exposure adjustments. So you could click on that and it will do some basic exposure adjusting, I guess. Again, you know, they're just for if you want to do some quick adjustments. I'll tell you the truth, I never ever use these. So you could just quickly click one of these and then you could tweak the adjustment below if you so choose. Now below that is this like back in the day when there was wet dark rooms and people created prints, they could use specific types of papers in combination with specific types of film, with combination of specific types of chemicals, and you could come up with all this kind of toning. So you could tone your image a specific way. As you could see here, as I click on these, I'm getting these different tones. So this is if you want to give it you know, a specific tone ahead of time, silver paper and stuff like that. You would you click on these drops right here. So that's just a really very easy way and quick way to add toning to your image. You could apply the settings. You could go back, like undo a setting, redo a setting. This will hide the quick tools. You can click that and it will reveal the quick tools. And two, if you're ever not sure of what anything does, if you hover over something, it will come up with this little tool tip telling us what it does. And this gets rid of the navigator. So if I click on that, the navigator's gone. I click on it, it's there. So you could customize this to look as you wish by you know, clicking some of these tools. So that's the quick tools. So we're going to reset again, and then I'm going to do that. Mainly, though, again, I will say that I generally will do a preset, then come over and tweak afterwards. And mainly what I'll do is I'll go to this first tab. You can see there's 4 tabs: Conversion, Creative Effects, Local Adjustments, and Finishing Touches. Conversion is where I spend a lot of my time. And under Conversion, there's 5 sub-tabs: Basic Exposure, Adaptive Exposure, Color Sensitivity, Color Filter, and the Curve tool. I generally use, of course, mostly adaptive exposure and color exposure, or I'm sorry, basic exposure. Most of that was taken care of, you know, in Lightroom. I don't have to do a lot here. But if you want to, you could increase or decrease contrast. You could reset the slider to its default position by double-clicking on the name, in this case contrast. If your image is a little bright, a little dark, you could adjust brightness. You could boost the blacks and boost the whites. That's, you know, make the blacks a little darker, make the whites a little whiter. if you so choose. So that's those basic exposure sliders. Now, the real, to me, oh, by the way, too, you can see these little checkboxes. You could turn these sections on and off. And I'll show you that more effectively under adaptive exposure. Adaptive exposure is really the magic, I think, in a lot of the Topaz product. It's very interesting. And the main ones you should worry about or get concerned with, I guess, or learn are these first two, the actual adaptive exposure slider and regions. Let's, they kind of work together. I'll, I'll try to explain this. We'll take regions all the way down to 1. That means the entire image is one region. As I move exposure up, it's kind of like the adaptive exposure is kind of like a contrast control on steroids, I like to call it. So what it's doing is I move it to the right, it's adding more contrast. It's making the lighter parts lighter and the darker parts darker. Because I have regions set to 1, it's doing it as though it's looking at the entire image. All right, so it's acting more or less like a normal contrast control. As I move regions up, it's basically dividing the image up into separate parts or regions. In this case, let's say 16. As I move the adaptive exposure up, it's treating each of these separate or these 16 different regions independently from one another. One thing you got to know is the more regions you choose to have, the more surreal your image starts to look, the more it looks like bad HDR. All right. So as you can see, 47 regions with an adaptive exposure of 0.81 really gives this really tone mapped ugly look, all right? So what I would suggest you do is be careful with the regions. You don't want to go too crazy on the regions, and you generally don't want too much or too heavy adaptive exposure. Now with that said, you can get a really nice looking image if you turn regions up nominally. In this case around 10. Maybe you could move it around. Just try it. You could see how it kind of almost like highlights different areas of the image. Um, so you can move it around and work with these two. I generally spend a lot of time playing around with these two sliders to get it to something I like. Now, the next two sliders, protect highlights and shadows. If you found that when adjusting the adaptive exposure in the regions sliders that you're starting to blow out your highlights or clip your shadows, then you would slide these sliders to dial them back a little bit so they're not clipping. Highlights won't be clipping. You can see as I move it to the left, the highlights got brighter. As I move it to the right, the highlights got darker. So that is if you're clipping. You could move these two sliders to protect your highlights or protect your shadows. Detail, that's really sharpening. And you could see, here, let's dial it back. You can see when it's down how it's kind of got this blur look to it. I move it way up, and it really added a lot of sharpening to it. And the detail boost really will add even more. I mean, crazy looking sharpening, right? So, tell you the truth, I don't usually mess with those. I would prefer to do any sharpening I have either in Lightroom or Photoshop. I don't really like to use this program for that. So, um, that's up to you, but you could experiment with it, of course. And again, double click on it, puts it back to its default position. Process details independently. I toggle that on and off sometimes to see if I like it better one way or another. In this case, and this won't always be the case, when it's on, it seems to make the picture softer. When it's off, it seems to be sharper. I would prefer it be sharper, so I'm going to leave it off. So that's what I do. I just adjust these, then I click that and take a look at it. Now I mentioned there's the checkbox here. If I want to turn this entire block of sliders off, I would just uncheck it and check it to have it on. So that's something to keep in mind. Now color sensitivity, this is similar to the HSL panel that's in Lightroom. Let's say I want my blue sky a little darker. I would go to the blue slider and move it to the left, and it makes the blues luminance level darker. So in black and white image, it will make it look darker. So We'll dial it down just a little. Greens, let's say I want to make greens a little lighter, and I want to make yellows a little lighter, not that light. Let's say I want to make greens a little darker. So I play around with these quite a bit actually to really fine tune my image. So that's color sensitivity. And again, you could turn it off, see what the before was, see what the after was. I don't know, I kind of like the before, so I'm going to leave it off. Color filter, now we touched on this when let's say I took red here. You could see how it turned on the color filter and it moved the hue slider to red. If I would have chose yellow, it moves the hue slider to yellow and so on to whatever color. So that's, if I so choose to add a color filter. Personally, I don't very often, so I'll have that off. The curve tool is a typical tone curve. You could come in and add some points to the curve and add, some, in this case I made it an S curve to add some contrast. Um, you could then drag if you don't like it, you could just take those spots right off like that. Are some presets down here. You could go lighter, darker, negative, light contrast. I kind of like light contrast, so we'll leave it there. I don't do that much either. As a matter of fact, I should do this like I normally will do it. I don't use the tone curve here at all. I prefer to use the tone curve in Lightroom or in Photoshop. So I won't use the tone curve here. So that's all the adjustment tabs, sub-tabs that are under conversion, number one. Two, creative effects. I don't do much with these, but you could simplify the image, putting it to the right, and you can see how it gives it this kind of, painterly look, I guess. And you could boost features. So you could play around with these if you're into this. I don't do anything personally with that. You want like a softer look to it, a kind of, photograph through Vaseline look. You can mess around with these sliders here to get different types of blur effects to it. They call it diffusion. Again, I don't use much with that. Posterize. Again, you could posterize the image. Again, this is something I don't do um, at all, but it's something if you're interested in, play around with it. Camera shake. This is kind of a weird, you know, look. Just basically you're adding blur to the image. Um, the angle, which way were you shaking your camera? Side to side, left to right, diagonally, whatever. Again, I never ever do anything like that. So these creative effects I usually don't even open. Local adjustments I might do. Now these, let me try to get them centered. And I should get rid of that to give us a little more room. Okay, we have different brushes basically. We could dodge and burn the image. I should mention up here, I didn't mention these. A brush here are actually dodging and burning. I just mentioned brush. This is the dodge brush and this is the burn brush. So those are in your quick tools if you want to use them. So those are there. So that's dodge. Dodge, of course, means you're making an area of the image lighter. So I could paint across here and you can see how it's making it lighter. Right there, I'm going to undo it. Okay. There's the burn tool. We have color, so you could use it for selective color. You could see that. I don't like that, but that's what you would do. Detail, you could brush in detail. So if you made it a little blurry from some of your other adjustments, but you want a portion of it to be sharp, you would use the detail brush. And then the smooth brush is basically the blur brush to me. You're kind of blurring out stuff that it does the opposite of detail, basically. You have a strength slider, so you can make the dodge or whatever brush you're using stronger by moving it to the right. You had the undo and redo buttons. This is a reset button. Okay, one thing I want to show you is the edge aware. I'm going to take the dodge tool and I'm going to make it very strong, and I'm going to use a lot of opacity, and I'm going to have edge aware all the way down. And I'm going to brush right across here. And you can see it just dodged right across the image, whether it was sky, land, or lake. It just dodged right across. So we'll reset that. Now when I turn edge aware on and I go across, you could see as long as I keep that plus sign above the horizon, it basically just dodged right above that break wall out there. So that's what edge aware does. It will help you dodge a specific part of the image without overlapping or spilling over on something else. And this is one thing I think this edge aware tool, I think it's something that Topaz does great. It really works well. So it not only works, of course, with the dodge tool, it works with the burn tool, any of these tools, this edge aware slider. So you know, I use it a lot. If I'm going to be doing any brushing on the images, I will use edge aware to make sure. Now, conversely, let's do the burn tool for the heck of it. We're going to turn hardness all the way up, edge aware all the way down. I'm going to keep the plus just above the horizon, and you can see how it's burning right across the image. I'm going to reset. Then I'm going to go and take edge aware all the way up, and I'm going to keep it that plus sign just above the horizon again. But you can see how it's only painting above the break wall. It didn't go onto the land below as it did before. So that's something to practice with, that edge aware tool. And that's the local adjustments. Finally, we have finishing touches. I don't do a lot here either. Again, the drops that we used are the silver and paper tones that we talked about before. So you could try to get these different effects. You know, if you like any of these, you could come in. You could, as I mentioned, use the quick tool, or if you so prefer, you could actually dial it in yourself right here and play around with those. I don't care for silver and paper tone effects. I think I used one once ever in my life. Quadtone. This divides your image up into 4 different regions, and you could actually tone your regions independent from one another. This is a really weird tool to me. I I don't really get it. So I admit it. I just don't really get it. I mean, you could stand here for hours and move these around and get different looks, you know, dial in these colors for your 4 different tones, I guess, but I don't care for it. So that's Quadtone. Film grain, you could use this drop down and you could pick a specific grain from a type of film that you're, you know, for those old like me that used film at one time. Like I used a lot of T-Max Pro, but I used a lot of Fujipan film. There's one specific one I'm looking for. There, T-Max Pro 3200. I actually use that quite a bit, and you can see how it adds a lot of noise to the image. So a lot of grain. So I could, you know, increase the contrast of the grain with that slider and the size of the grain with this slider. So if you're into grain, that's what that film grain tab will do. Um, if you want to add a border to your image, you could try these different border types in this preset dropdown. You know, thin black, whatever. I'm not really into borders myself either. I'm pretty boring, I guess. Edge exposure. This is another kind of odd one. Let's say top, and I want to change the exposure at the top of the image. I would move it to the right, let's say, to make it darker. And I could change the size with this slider, make it bigger, like that. And I could do it, change the transition, whether it's very sharp or very soft. You know, how far it bleeds, I guess, into the image. So I could do the top one way, I could do the bottom an entire different way if I so choose. Um, Again, I don't think I've ever used that. So that's edge exposure. So I'll leave that off. A vignette, and those of you that know, I do like to use dark vignettes. Um, I don't I don't do it here though. I prefer to use Lightroom or Photoshop for the vignette. Um, you know, it's just personal preference, but if you want, you could play around with the sliders and try to get a nice vignette the way you like it. And finally, the transparency. This, like the other Topaz plugins, this kind of affects like layers in Photoshop. It's as though your original image is the bottom layer, that's your original color image, and then the top layer is this black and white image that we just did all this processing on. If I want to have some of my color bleed through, I would slide this slider to the right, and you could see we get this quasi colored image. If I go all the way to the right, we're going to have our original color image, pretty much. So this, I actually haven't used, but I could see myself using this because I kind of like this washed out kind of color look. So that's something to think of there. So I might leave it at that. So that is really everything there is to know in Topaz Black and White Effects 2. When you're satisfied with your image, click OK. It will process and save the image. And if you're using Lightroom, it will reappear in Lightroom. It just takes a second. And there it is. So that's it. I hope that helps those of you that like these plugins and help you give you a head start on using black and white effects too. So that's it. I'd like to thank everyone watching my videos. I really do appreciate it. Thank you very, very much. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'd appreciate that. All right, I'll talk to you guys soon.